In the days when the first of these pictures were made, trains were dispatched by telegraph. Hump yards were an expensive dream, and trains were sorted by hand signals. Yet the Nickel Plate got trains over the road with a speed that no other railroad could match. How did they do it? At the end of the Great Depression, when some of the best Class I railroads in America were struggling to emerge from bankruptcy and financial disgrace, the Nickel Plate was judged to be among the strongest railroads in America and one of the soundest investments by the financial community. Between the end of World War II and the merger with the Norfolk and Western in 1964, its profits soared to more than $250 million. Its president was featured on the cover of Businessweek, and the magazine headline crowed, "Proof that railroading can pay."
It was a family railroad. The thing that still amazes me, even at my age today, knowing how they're operating today and what they did in those days, is that the youngest brakeman on the railroad could stop the president of the railroad and say, "Mr. Phipps, I'd like to talk to you about something." And he would promptly stop and take his book out and say to the brakeman, "What can I do for you?"
Our shippers knew, and the Nickel Plate had a history of getting the trains over the road and getting the merchandise to market on time. And all of our engineers and conductors and the people who worked in the transportation department, they were all conscious of the fact that we've got to get there on time and beat our competition, and we always did. And that was what made the Nickel Plate Railroad such a wonderful railroad and prosperous.
Back before, we had centralized traffic control and worked with train orders.
Yeah.
Wherever you was stopped, you always had to have it in the back of your mind about whether you had to be in the clear at a certain time. And another thing that you always had to be remember was the water tank. You had to be in a position when you needed water to get water.
Yeah.
And that
You had to plan your work to go.
you had to plan your work to go with the water tank. Regardless, there was no way out of it.
And sometimes we used to run kind of short going into the yard.
That's right. That's right.
I would say that over the 33 years that I was on the railroad, that was the greatest experience that I'd ever had.
Well, there was a lot of romance in the steam engines. I always thought that you'd get an engine today on a set-off train and it'd sound like it was ready to die. It'd poof and huff, and you get that same engine the next day on a fast freight, and the steam would be popping and dancing just like it was itching and raring to go for you. And I think that was part of the romance of it. And to get a fast freight and run 132 miles without stopping for coal and water, I thought was quite a feat. With our average train was what, 4,000, 5,000 tons
in that neighborhood. You
4,000, 85 cars.
Yeah.
Mostly meat and perishable, I grant you that, but it's still there. You got 4,000, 5,000 tons, and it's quite a feat to have that engine travel that far for coal and water.
Back in the days of steam engine, before radio and that, we relied on talking with our hands. If they had a hot box, 12 from the rear end, we'd hold our nose, 10 to the rear end. If it was something very disastrous, very, very important, we'd just swing them down. Stop now. Stop right now.
Give them the most important one, Clifton.
What? All right.
Yeah, don't
All right.
feed bag.
Okay.
Here's one. Cut off the engine. Put it in the barn. Go get something to eat. Go to bed.
While it was under Vanderbilt control, the Nickel Plate slumbered along quietly so as not to unsettle the New York Central. But it woke up smartly when the Central was threatened with a federal antitrust suit in 1916 and forced to sell its nickel plate control. Its buyers were real estate developers who knew nothing about railroading, but who needed 2.5 miles of right-of-way in Cleveland to connect their Shaker Heights real estate development with downtown. To satisfy their requirements, they wound up buying 513 miles of railroad in not very good condition. But it had potential. It was shorter than the parallel New York Central. In fact, in combination with its partner, the Lackawanna, it offered the shortest route between New York and Chicago, save for the Pennsylvania. It had lower grades than the Central, and much of it was straight as a die. The new owners, the Ben Swearingens, began a complete transformation. New sidings permitted longer trains, higher plant capacity, and faster freights. A huge rebuilding program was begun, and the road's first 282 Mikados were purchased. A distinctive logo was adopted. After World War I, the Nickel Plate acquired other railroads, which gave it access to Toledo, St. Louis, and Peoria, the gateway to the West. In 1925, the Ben Swearingens bought the Chesapeake and Ohio, and the Nickel Plate joined with them in testing Lima's first superpower Berkshires east of Hinton on the C&O. They didn't place orders then, but the following year, they bought their first Hudson. Their order for 4 was delivered only a few weeks after the first American Hudson, the New York Central's famous 5200. In 1933, at the depth of the Great Depression, the Nickel Plate began designing its own superpower locomotive, a 284 Berkshire. The first 15 were delivered in 1934. In late 1942, the C&O gave up operating control of the Nickel Plate. That, together with the surge in World War II traffic, caused the fortunes of the Nickel Plate to take off. 30 new Berkshires were delivered in 1941. Between 1937 and 1943, the average daily mileage of their freight locomotives went from 111 to 186. Between 1941 and 1942, the ton miles of freight carried jumped an incredible 53%. The Berkshire had become the backbone of Nickel Plate high-speed freight service. The New York Central had 5 times as much track as the Nickel Plate. Yet despite this, the Nickel Plate carried 1/3 as much freight. What's more, they did it with just 12 train masters. The New York Central required more than 90. When things went wrong on the parallel New York Central 4-track main line, the Nickel Plate could add the New York Central's entire passenger fleet to their already congested single-track main and deliver it on time to its destination.
Ed and I was going east on MB 98.
Right, oh.
And at Florence, Ohio, apparently we broke a wheel. And I told Ed to hold on, and when the disabled car hit the switch at the east end of the siding, we put, what, about 29, 60.
Yeah.
And in these cars was a very, very dangerous carload of what we called HCN. One breath would kill you. The wind was coming from the southwest, so we walked on the south side of the train and stayed away as much as we could to get up to this car. We didn't know that it was derailed, but it was in the derailment. But it so happened that it didn't rupture.
It had a hole in the outer shell only.
Had a hole in the outer shell, but it did not rupture.
They came around the curve down into the old crossing there on the Erie, and at that time they had a tilting target. I called the target the engineer, and apparently he didn't hear me. They were wrong. So I got down around the curve a little farther. I walked over the side of him, and I said, "Hey, the target's wrong." Well, he said, "Okay." So we only had 18 high hoppers of coal, and there was an Erie local across the Erie. So he got around where he could see, he dumped the air and started to whistle. And one of the Erie brakemen, they must have been all old-timers, because the engineer must have been right on the job, because the brakeman ran out of the telegraph shanty, which was on the south side, all the way across the nickel plate tracks, pulled the pin, give the engineer a signal, and you couldn't have put your, well, I don't believe you could have put your body between the end of the drawbar on those cars, and we went through between them.
If I recollect, it was the 4th of July, 1945. We had a broken pony wheel which derailed going around a curve at Willoughby and hit a spur on the east side of Willoughby and turned over on the right side of the engine, on the engineer's side. And lucky that none of us were very seriously hurt. That's one of my experiences. And I've had a few other experiences along the wreck line with trains which derailed side by side, and I don't know, probably 60, 65 cars derailed on the east side of Geneva, Ohio.
We were at Paynesville on the local, and we was going to make a drop of a car, which is you go quite fast, and then you pull a pin and the engine goes one way and the car goes the other. And I was on the car and the engine goes into the wrong track and hit a car of gasoline and put it up over the engine, and all I could think of was it'd blow up about the time I got there. That's the one thing that I can remember more than anything. And the gasoline was going all the way, and that was what I was afraid of, that I'd get there about that time and it'd blow up.
It did blow.
No, no. The natives got a lot of free gasoline.
These 700s with their heavy counterweights pounded rail pretty hard, changing out rails, and he picked up rail along there, and they'd just do a somersault and jump out of the tongs. He couldn't hold them with the rail tong. And a little later he set one down when he got to a terminal where he could. He set one down on a piece of concrete, and measured the rail, and it measured 16 inches high on each end, the amount of bow that was in that rail sitting on the ground on its own weight. They'd been pounded that hard that they just wouldn't lie down on the ties any longer. Speed's what does it, and the heavy counterweights that you can see on this engine sitting behind us here. They greased the rail there, took a 700 up there, mounted a camera down next to the cylinder head to take a picture between the rail and the drivers. And they would have them spin the locomotive at 60 miles an hour and then back up and spin it again at 70 miles an hour. And then finally they had him up at 80 miles an hour and he was spinning, and finally he said stop, or he couldn't stand the pounding. And Frank, he says, I can give you some more, but he says, oh, that'll be fine, Mr. Stark. And when they developed the camera that the filmed, looked them over, they found that the drivers were leaving the rail by 3 inches at 80 miles an hour.
And he kept getting himself so agitated, and all of a sudden he yanked his hat off and said to this conductor, how could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? Which, of course, the conductor had nothing to do with it. And he had on his hat, and he took it off, and I didn't know who the official was at that time, and he threw it on the floor in the Madison Depot and jumped up and down with it on both feet, screaming. And I said to this official who I knew, and I said, who's that nut? And he said, oh, that's the superintendent. And he said, not only that, that's a Stetson hat, and he just bought that in Cleveland yesterday. But he really turned out to be a real nice guy. But I didn't know him at that time, and he was all excited about the wreck, and everything was going to be delayed, and there was no way to get anything by him or anything, because it was going from a double track to the single track, and he really had us messed up.
You had the key word, the delay. That's what they didn't want to eat, that delay. You could do almost anything, but don't delay a train. When that Young first bought the New York Central, he was coming east on a excursion there. He was looking over what he'd bought. He bought the New York Central Railroad. About that time, here goes a freight train by on the Nickel Plate right past it, and he says, quoted it, he looked at that and pointed his finger out, he says, that's got to stop. I'm not going to have these Nickel Plate freights out running the trains on the New York Central.
Well, yes, but that was when they had teamwork, and they used to bring these, in the steam days, they used to bring a train into Bellevue, and in 30 minutes it was already torn apart and put all back together again and was gone. Mm-hmm. And when they had the hump, they said, oh, this is going to be more modern, this is going to be the best way to do it. 9 hours later it leaves town. They could not believe...
Or 9 weeks.
Yeah, but they could not believe that you could do this. But you had to remember that these people worked as a team. If somebody was sick, they just hate to see another man come along, because as soon as this train got in, they didn't pay quite as attention to the rules like today. They always talk about safety this and safety that. It was just as safe then because everybody knew what he was doing anyway. And so the guy would, they did things that were uncalled for. The company didn't require it, but they wanted to get that train out. They had so much pride. That's one thing about nickel plate men. They had pride.
We took great pride in our work. We made an honest effort to get over the road and give a day's pay. Our officials were all men from the ranks, and they treated us like men. They knew we knew our job, and they weren't harassing us or anything else. And all the fellows were congenial that we worked with, and it was just like you say, one big family.
When Ray was firing and I was a head brakeman, sometimes I would fire and he'd be the head brakeman. Of course, today you couldn't do that. You weren't even supposed to do it in those days, but we did it, and the officials saw you do it. He just turned his back and looked the other way. Because we were all family, we were all friends, and we grew up together. Ray and I started out as, he started out as a fireman, and I started out as a brakeman. And later on, I turned out to be a conductor, and he's my engineer. So it worked out great. We had come up together. We understood each other. We knew how to trust each other. We could get in a tight situation, and when we did, we knew exactly what he could or could not do.
On the eastbounds, an engine like this one would come in, be totally serviced, and running again in 15 minutes. The train will leave town, train had been totally inspected, every journal touched, walked, and the locomotive completely serviced.
But if sometimes we needed some help, then the fireman would get right off on the ground and help you. Today, if he did that, the official would fire him because he wouldn't supposed to be on that ground. At the same time, if maybe the fireman didn't feel so good or something, well, then maybe the brakeman would take over for a while and would sort of relieve each other. So we learned to be a brakeman, you also learn to be a fireman. You learn to be a fireman and engineer, you also learn to be a brakeman and a conductor. Because it was, like I said, a nickel plate was a family thing. And they were your family. They were your brothers and your fathers and your uncles and so forth. And that's the way you worked it.
were approaching the bridge, we're slowing down, and the KC's overtaking us, and he's already passed us, but he had to slow down to 20 mile an hour, and we slowed to 30 and repassed him right in the bridge. Then continued right on up the hill to Farnham with all 4 locomotives hitting just as hard as they could possibly run. You're talking about the fellowship and fellows working together as friends. Well, they compete pretty hard when they're side by side going up a hill, too. I think the Indians down there thought they were dynamiting that night. It was quite a trip from there on in. That whole trip is one you remember all your life. It's hard to think about racing trains with 100 cars on each one and 4 locomotives involved and everything, but we ran them. That was the way it was done with the Nickel Plate.
Meat, fruit, and other perishables command much higher tariffs than bulk commodities, coal, iron ore, and so forth. The Nickel Plate left much of the heavy slogging to its parallel competitors and took out after the perishables. It had few branches. The Nickel Plate was a so-called bridge road. It picked up from another railroad at one end of its line and delivered to a third at the other. This long haul made for economies of operation, but since it originated little traffic on its own line, the Nickel Plate was in direct competition with every parallel line: the New York Central, the Pennsylvania, the Baltimore and Ohio, and the Wabash. It could count on little cushion in the way of steady, captive traffic. Over time, captive traffic, however, had made the big railroads complacent. It fostered a slow, often multi-layered or bureaucratic response to customer needs. If the Nickel Plate could seize the high-margin merchandise, it could run with it. But the only incentive it had to offer the customer was service. It was typical that the first document on the president's desk in Cleveland Tower in the morning stated the arrival time of the Nickel Plate #1 hotshot in Buffalo. If it was after the 4 a.m. deadline, the report required explanations all the way down the line. Until the advent of the Berkshire, the USRA 282 Mikados, acquired during World War I, were the most important engines on the Nickel Plate. This one is doing what these Mikados did best after the arrival of the 700s, hustling the empties back for refill. They often double-headed with the 700s when the load didn't require 2 Berkshires at once. When steam finally was retired on the Nickel Plate, one of these Mikados, 587, was donated to the city of Indianapolis for display. Here she is, restored to letter-perfect running condition, pulling an excursion from Indianapolis to Logansport. The gleaming stainless steel coaches are half of an order placed by the Santa Fe Railroad in 1937 to equip their El Capitan streamliner between Chicago and Los Angeles, and later used on the Texas Chief. When loaded, a Berkshire-class tender alone weighed more than this entire locomotive.
Just to look at one of these, you can see how exciting a person would be with an engine like this. You see these engines here, the 700 engines. Now, Cookie, you might remember this. Maybe you never rode the head end when these engines, when you'd get up to a certain speed, how they would buck. They'd just shake it like that. That was really scary. And when they take this insulation in the cab inside there, and when they buck that hard, it knocked all that insulation off the roof of that cab in there, and you'd get just as black as a piece of coal. But they had to lace them up between the tender and the engine in order to eliminate that. But when you got these things wound up, you know, and you were going downhill or something like that, when they were chasing on themselves, that's when they'd go into a backspin like that. That was scary too at times. I know it was with me.
Strips all the bolts right off. All these things come off here. Let one of these tie rods come down. They'll give you a thrill.
We had one almost come off one of these. This big driving rod here. That came down. It was within about that far of coming all the way off. If that would have ever came off, see, it rode just on the edge of the ties, where the ties stick out. And if it had ever dropped down there, that would have been something.
By 1948, the Nickel Plate had dieselized all its long-haul passenger trains with Alco PA equipment. In June of that year, they began testing a 4-unit F3 freight diesel, but concluded that it didn't offer any significant savings over their Berkshire. Compared to other steam railroads, the Nickel Plate worked its steam power over much longer times and distances. Greater utilization was one of the principal reasons for conversion from steam to diesel. But the razor-sharp efficiency of the Nickel Plate steam operation was such that this simply did not apply. The clincher was the initial cost. A 4-unit set of F3s was 2.5 times that of a Berkshire. The Nickel Plate ordered 10 more. Not long after their first sales attempt, General Motors' Electromotive Division came along with the F7 for testing. They chose the tough grades of the Peoria Division. The improvements were noticeable, but the Nickel Plate still demurred.
always, you had the president, and vice president, general manager, the whole caboodle of them. They all knew you. A lot different it was on the on the Norfolk and Western.
I had about 30 days shy of 40 years for getting their beautiful N&W pin, diamond pin. But I couldn't handle it 30 days more. I was never so happy in my life to get away from the N&W.
The N&W left the majority of the people feel that they didn't know anything about railroading. But I think it was a come-on their part. And it was a big letdown. I mean, once they put their foot down, and there was a lot of difference in the operation, an awful lot of difference.
An engineer never knew when he was going to work. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You never knew till the phone rang. And you had an hour and a half time to get to work. In spite of all those adverse, undesirable parts of it, it was a very fascinating life.
Exciting, every trip was exciting. It was always different.
good job. Everybody worked together, and like Mr. Brian says, we got the trains over the road.
I liked my job during the nickel plate days, and I think Mr. Lang can verify that too, that we had a wonderful job in those days, didn't we, Harry?
Right. I did find the railroad very exciting, though. I mean, from one trip to another, every day it was something different.
And I'm glad I'm gone. I don't look back at it. I have never looked back at it. I think it was a great part of my life. And I tell my son that I was one of the fortunate people in the world. There were two things in my life that I wanted to be. One was a pilot in the Air Force, and one was a conductor on a nickel plate railroad, and I made both of them.
How did they do it? Start with a straight, flat, beautifully engineered right-of-way. Then add the super efficient, superpower 700 class Berkshire locomotive, 112 of them, built in just 7 years between 1942 and 1949. And run those locomotives like no railroad before or since has ever run a steam engine. Further, faster, and more efficiently than the most experienced railroad men said was possible. But that was only the beginning. More than high-margin manifest, a superb right-of-way, and magnificent superpower locomotives, the key ingredient of the nickel plate, the thing that made it stock the darling of Wall Street, were the people who made it tick. NK people worked as a tightly knit team, each one dedicated to a single goal, moving high-margin manifest with speed and reliability. They succeeded because they had the right tools to work with and because of the depth of their commitment to service.